I'm talking
Yeah.
about government interference today. What should be done?
Well, there's no clear answer to that question. It's what shouldn't be done to a large extent. What shouldn't be done is calling carbon dioxide carbon. Just remember this, anybody who calls CO2 carbon, don't listen to a word they say, because CO2 is not carbon. It is carbon dioxide. We don't call water hydrogen. Water is hydrogen
H2O.
dioxide, right?
I learned that from the Water Boy. Shout out to Adam Sandler.
So you don't call it hydrogen just because it's the first letter in the formula. So these people are calling it carbon because they want you to think of soot, right? Well, why don't they want you to think of diamonds? Because that's pure carbon too, and so is graphite, what our pencils have in them. Carbon is a miracle element, and CO2 is a miracle molecule because all the carbon in all life comes from CO2 in the air and the ocean. That's where it comes from. And fossil fuels are made with carbon that came from life. So all the fossil fuels were made with solar energy. Have you heard that before?
No.
Well, how else did the oil and gas are from marine animals and the coal is from forests on the land? They were made with solar energy. That's the basis of all life, turning carbon dioxide and water into sugar. And then the sugar is the energy for all of life, from there on up to us. All life. And if we threaten our own food system with these stupid rules about not using nitrogen or carbon dioxide, maybe they're going to ban carbon dioxide in greenhouses the next thing you know. People are working in there in CO2 levels 2 and 3 times what it is in the atmosphere. And actually, right in this room now, CO2 will be at least double what it is out in the air because of our breathing. We breathe out 2 pounds of CO2 every day. And the atmosphere is now 420 parts per million CO2. When we exhale, it's 40,000 parts per million CO2 because we're taking in oxygen and breathing out CO2. The plants take in CO2 and breathe out oxygen. So it's a perfect cycle. And that's nature in a nutshell. And people are not being even educated about that. Never mind about basic chemistry and biology. And the fact of the matter is the Earth is very healthy at its present state. That's
great to hear. We always hear there's no planet B, that the Earth is dying. That
it's not dying, but the oceans are being overfished in many places because of
You hear that all the time.
Well, it's international waters. There's no governance there. And for example, Canada and the United States have a treaty with Japan and Russia over the salmon in the North Pacific. So we do have governance there about how many we can take and what we can do. There's quite a few of these treaties.
Who's the biggest culprit in overfishing and in the international waters?
Japan, China, Spain, Portugal. Maybe I haven't got the top 4 there, but
and who's holding these countries accountable?
Well, they make their own rules in international waters. Like for the reason they were able to kill 30,000 whales a year, big whales a year in the North Pacific, Japan and Russia were both involved in that with big factory fleets before we got out there for 4 years and got in front of the harpoons and got on television all around the world. And it was finally ended by the International Whaling Commission, which is an arm of the United Nations. And so that we succeeded. But it was very difficult because there was, in a sense, a governing body, the International Whaling Commission, but really ruled by the whaling countries. So we did a political movement where we recruited island nations to join the International Whaling Commission, ones that wanted to stop the whaling. And we got a majority on the IWC. Back then, we didn't want to admit that was what was going on because some people thought that was unfair, especially the guys that were killing the whales. About the celebrity analogy. I don't know how to parse society in a way to give a decent answer to that, except all I know is I've worked all my life in the environmental field. I've seen how it has changed and gone off on a course that it's gone off on now, where it's taking advantage of this situation of people being afraid that they're killing their grandchildren while they're driving their car. And there are really no celebrities on the science side. Most of the people on the science side that think like I do are scientists.
Well, you have someone like Bill Nye out there. He's, I would say, a celebrity scientist, household name.
Yes, except
a lot of the Gen Z grew up with that guy.
Bill Nye.
But the point is, I know you're shaking your head. You're kind of Bill Nye. He's a joke. Green New Deal.
He
it's
is
a joke.
Yeah.
Paris Climate. I don't agree with it.
I'm not saying.
But this is who's making traction.
Yes, those aren't jokes. The Paris Climate Deal is not a joke. It's an international treaty, and it's based on the idea that a 1 degree more rise in global temperature will be a disaster, a crisis, an emergency, which is so ridiculous if you look at the history of the temperature of the Earth. I mean, we're actually at the tail end of a 50 million year cooling period at this point in the Pleistocene Ice Age. And yet they're saying it's too hot. I mean, it's that simple. But what do you do about fads and cults and
who can
popular
you recruit
movements
to get your message out there?
We have
essentially what I'm asking.
We have an organization which is recruiting. It's called the CO2 Coalition. It's based in Arlington, Virginia. Greg Wrightstone is the executive director. He is a very smart geologist who understands the ages of the Earth, and he also understands politics very well. We just had a really good win in Pennsylvania where a judge overturned the Pennsylvania Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which was going to cost billions of dollars. And just like with the recent Supreme Court decision on the EPA and CO2, this is basically making the point that these administrations, the deep state basically, does not have the right to overrule Congress and to go beyond what Congress has approved. There's a trend in that direction now, and that is a good trend, and we are helping with that with information directly to the people who are making the decisions. So the CO2 Coalition here, Clintel, it's a funny name, but it's initials for a global warming group in Europe mainly. It is now got over 1,000 people who are real scientists behind it, and so we are organizing, but we are not politicians. We're just not born, and we're not movie stars, you know. So it's not an easy road to hoe, but the truth surely will eventually come to the surface, especially if the climate doesn't warm very much in the next while, which it hasn't been doing for the last while. So we don't really have any big trend of warming going on. As a matter of fact, Western North America was colder this spring and early summer than it has been for a long time.
But those aren't the messages we're hearing in the media.
Well, they don't report cold. They only report hot. You know, so that's the other problem that is a societal problem and a political problem, is the vast majority of the media is fake now. And they're not reporting the southern border. They're not reporting the climate news. I see politicians saying that Bangladesh now has the biggest flood in 100 years. They have floods every year. 100 people have died this year in floods. Just a few years ago, 400 people died in floods. And they're saying it's the biggest in 100 years. And these are Canadian members of parliament.
Is it the fact that the media is actually fake, or they more just have an agenda and they want to stick to that agenda? There's a difference there.
No, in order to stick to their agenda, they must lie. That's what they're doing. And they know they're doing it. They absolutely know they're twisting it and turning and ignore. They have two strategies. One is to lie, the other one is to ignore. So a combination of lying and ignoring works really well at making the population ignorant of what's really going on in the world today. Because what's going on in the world today is that the air is healthy, healthier than it was 50 years ago or even 100 years ago or even 200 years ago when they were burning coal in every house. You know, they had the Black Death in London occurred before 1900 when they finally realized they had to stop using coal as their main fuel. Mm-hmm. And all kinds of changes have happened which make the air in the world cleaner today. The forest area of the world is growing today. As I mentioned, China and India are largely responsible, but Europe as well. And we're not losing forest. There's more forest in the United States today than there was in 1900, by a small margin, but there is more. And that's because people are planting trees, because, you see, the more wood we use, people think, oh, the more wood we use, the fewer trees there will be. No, the more wood we use, the more trees there will be. Because when people use wood, someone has to plant another tree in order to produce the wood for the next person that wants it. So building all our house structures out of wood actually is one of the main reasons why we have so many trees here. The reason Haiti has almost no forest is because they build their houses out of substandard concrete, which falls on their heads in an earthquake and killed 250,000 of them after the Japanese tsunami, which killed no one in the earthquake. Unfortunately, 20,000 people died in the tsunami. But that wasn't because buildings failed. That was because of the wave. The buildings in Japan are built to standards that can withstand an earthquake of 9. In Haiti, an earthquake 20 times less powerful killed 250,000 people.
It's powerful right there.
Because if they built their houses out of wood that is treated for termites, it was easy treatment for termite resistance in wood. If they would build their houses with termite-resistant wood, they would have forests all across the country like their neighbor Dominican Republic has. It's a famous border between the two. From the satellite, you can see Haiti completely deforested and the Dominican Republic green and lush as can be. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. I'm not going to Haiti.
It's funny, for me, the more we do, this is not my area of expertise. I'm just curious about it. Like, it's something that I want to talk to more people to see opposing ideas. But the one thing that does concern me is capacity. That's the one thing that concerns me. And you see half these guys that are using, it's very easy to use fear tactics with something that can be made up. It's very easy to use this in marketing campaign. It's an easy gimmick to use, but the concern, again, for me is capacity, the world population. That's the part that concerns me, because we're 2 doubles away from 32 billion people living here.
But you can see, Patrick, that it's self-controlling, because if there's too many people, they won't be able to live. And so then there won't be too many people anymore. Now, it's a fine line, because possibly what will happen is the population will continue to grow and grow and grow, and then something will happen. It'll get cold, and the crops will fail in the north, and you'll have mass starvation. That's what has happened all through the history of civilization.
Yeah, but so then there's 2 choices we have. Do we just accept that and when it comes, or do we do something about it today to educate, to prepare, to anticipate? Is it better to play in the anticipation and preparation game, or is it better to sit there and say, look, when that time comes and we starve and half the population in the world dies, we'll adjust to it and we'll move forward?
Well, that would be the case. It's the case with all the animals and all the plants and all the insects that have to adjust to the change in climates through the millions of years.
Is that the approach, the proactive approach?
There are plagues, and you're afraid of a human plague. I can understand that. It would be a plague is really when there's more than can survive, and then you have a mass die-off once they've eaten themselves out of house and home, like with locusts, for example. Once they've eaten all the crops, there's nothing left for them. So that kind of thing could happen with humans. I don't know we are capable of planning, whereas a bear probably, I don't know, they plan a little bit. They go and get into a den in the winter, so I guess that's part of planning for them. But we can really plan in a serious way, of course. But you have to wonder how far you go from a draconian point of view. What do you force people to do?
Not force. I don't think I'm saying force. I'm saying education.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think most people today would agree with you that we should not overpopulate the earth.
Okay.
But the problem is, what is the definition of overpopulation?
But what I'm saying is, if the guys who are the PhDs of the world, I'm not the PhD of the world, but if the PhDs of the world team up with the business analytics of the world and they pull up the formula, I guarantee you guys can come with a high-low. I guarantee you can come up with a high-low to say, this is the number, guys.
Not if you take into account the fact that there are going to be countless innovations into the future in health. I know a guy who's working on a procedure that would prevent calcification in our veins. And that's the main reason people eventually die, is because of blood flow in your veins. People die of other things before that happens.
Sure.
But the reason not many people live more than 105 or so is because that's a natural process that occurs. And if you think about it, death is an absolute necessity for evolution, because nothing would change if nobody died, right? That goes for birds and plants and everything, right? So the reason that life has evolved to where it is today is because of the cycle of birth and death. And so we may be able, though, with our chemistry and our medical knowledge, to make people live 200 years. Then what happens? Now you've effectively got twice as many people.
That's even worse.
Well, I don't know about worse. It would mean
you'd want to live 200 years?
It would mean, well,
I would.
Who wouldn't?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, well,
good.
But you want to live a little longer than
I wouldn't
now.
mind. I think 80 to 100 is fine with me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We need you to get to
and I'm
100 people.
200 years old. You don't have kids. You live 200 years old. I got to watch a couple of my kids. I'm good.
What if you were 200 years old and still as healthy as you are today, though?
I think there is. I think there is nobility in it's somebody else's time, and it's time for you to move on to somebody else taking over
Yes.
your. I think there's nobility and honor in that. I think it's too selfish to want to hold that kind of influence for that long. Somebody else has. Their pruning process is healthy. Anyways, that's just my philosophy.
I was saying that about evolution. Yes, it is healthy. There has to be a pruning process, or nothing would ever change. In other words, everything would still be microscopic, one-celled things in the ocean.
Let me ask you a crazy question. So, when somebody becomes a president or a prime minister, how much do they care how the economy in that country does during the 8 years they're the president versus how the country does 100 years later?
Well, at this point, it doesn't seem like many presidents, especially in the English-speaking world, give a damn about the 8 years they're in power. I mean, we've got a ski board instructor running Canada. We've got a half-demented person here with a vice president that can't string two words together properly, running the United States of America. Boris Johnson, thankfully, is gone, but who's going to replace him? And the Australia has just brought in this weird government.
Colombia has brought a weird guy as well. They're just bringing weird people left and right. I guess the qualification is to become a man in power is to be a little bit weird. Maybe that's what they're looking for.
I just don't understand why there aren't more qualified people seeking these positions. But then again, maybe not many people actually want the heat.
No, not just the heat. It's fear. It's the freedom. It's life is a lot easier. Then let them deal with the problem. I guess the point I'm trying to make to you is the following: how many people that become president sit there and say, "I want to create policies that 10 presidents from now makes America a better country"? Or how many presidents get up and say, "Hey, Mary, can you tell me my approval rating this morning?" "Oh, shit. Okay, let's go tell them we're going to give $1 billion of subsidies to pa. "Oh, what? Yeah, but it went up to 41%. You're no longer the worst president of all time." Like, meaning, what I'm trying to say is, how many presidents actually give a shit about what's going to happen 100 years from now?
You're not going to bring up the T word, are you?
What's the T word?
The next letter is R.
Treason?
Trump.
No.
Is that a bad word in your mind?
No, it isn't, because I asked people not why do you hate him, what policies that he brought in during his tenure do you disagree with? And I don't know what the answer can be. The policies he brought in were about the future, and we're about the economy, and we're about the people, and we're about the southern border, and we're about energy independence, and we're about whatever. I don't know of a bad policy that he passed. And Biden comes in and just rubs them all out with the stroke of a pen on the first day and causes an energy disaster and an Afghanistan disaster, and all these other disasters, and he still has 25% approval rating. I mean, that's a good thing, because that means he has 75% not good approval rating. But I just don't understand why the hate happened. It makes no sense to me, because hate is not a good reason to be against a person, especially if they haven't done anything wrong. And it's been proven 8 or 10 times over that he didn't do anything illegal or wrong, but they went after him like as if he had robbed the bank, you know. And I am very unpopular for even ever mentioning his name, even in my own country of Canada.
Oh, we talk about him all the time. You're in safe space here, but we'll get back to that, because he's got some things he'll say to you about that. But let me finalize the point I was trying to make. Do you know what point I'm trying to make? The point I'm trying to make.
I think you want to know how many people can live on Earth if we keep going this direction. Is that not what you're looking for?
So my point is the following. Here's my point. No matter what country you look at when it comes down to elections, how many of those presidents are concerned about what the country's legacy is going to be 50 years from now?
No, zero.
They care about their 8 years.
Well, that's left or right, I think, what you're getting at. Whether you're any country in the world, of course, you care about your power now.
This is zero to do with left, right, middle, zero. This is not like, this is why we need a libertarian president. I'm not doing that at all. All I'm saying is the current structure of any leadership in any country is what? How is the market going to do while I'm there, right? Okay.
Yeah. Isn't that the same for any CEO, though? Quarterly earnings,
not
how
founders,
the company's
not
doing?
Founders. CEOs, yes, not founders, because founders live forever. CEOs don't.
Okay.
Founders live for life. You can't name every CEO of McDonald's, but you can name the founders.
Sure. Ray
You can't
Kroc.
name you can name the founding fathers. You're gonna forget a lot of the presidents. If I told you who's the 19th president, you may not get it right. But if I tell you who's the founding father, you're probably gonna get it right. So the point I'm trying to make
You're
is
saying the founding fathers have a vision. The CEOs are more concerned with quarterly or
founding
annual
fathers,
earnings.
if they're watching what's going on, are devastated because they're founders. They're like, dude, we put this together for it to work, and you guys are breaking this thing. Founders are different, but this is the point. So if you look at right now, worst case scenario, according to the math that we just did, when is the next double going to be? When are we going to go from 8 billion to 16 billion? Tyler,
Next 40 years, I believe.
okay, so worst case, how many years? 60 years. What's 60 years from today? 2080. And how long will it take to double again after that?
We don't know.
So, but we, based on data, you
No,
keep
it's
going back
not-
to data,
It's not based on data. You're projecting the future by past data.
and you just use a bunch of past.
But I didn't predict the future.
But you have to predict the future.
No, you can't.
But no, it's not you can't. You can, but you may be wrong. You can. Yeah, that's what visionaries do.
You're more than likely to be wrong.
Well,
George Orwell somehow got it right.
yeah, some people do get it right. In 1984, when it was
1984?
written, when he wrote the book, a lot of people said he's a fraud.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's play the game of let's forecast and see what could potentially happen. And it's okay if we get it wrong, just like George Well got it right. If we do forecast, in 60 years, we're at 16 billion. If we do forecast, and I'm comfortable being wrong, in 120 years, we're at 32 billion.
You won't know whether you were wrong or not.
I don't care if I know
Why?
at that
Because you
point
said
or
the
not.
human species will cease to exist
so-
at that
Because
point?
we won't be here.
I'm in the insurance business.
120 years.
I'm in the insurance. I sell life insurance. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Do you know what age you're going to die? I don't know what age I'm going to die.
Nobody does.
Nobody does. But guess what? It's better off having it in case you do die, so your family's protected.
Yes.
So I want to sit there and say, okay, for the people that are using tactics to win elections today, that's not, climate change shouldn't be the number one priority of any campaign. Should it be a top 10 thing that we pay attention to? That we have to figure out a way, not even the word climate change is not even on my priority. It's what's the plan to know what the capacity of this planet is. What is our capacity? We need to know those numbers. What number can we not touch?
Is energy on your priority?
In regards to, like, you're talking cobalt and what's going on in Congo and lithium?
No. I mean, just in general, without energy, nothing moves.
Sure.
And without energy, there's no heat.
Okay.
Or cold, because air conditioning depends on it too. So what we have here is, even though you might not think climate change is an important issue, and I don't either, as a matter of fact, because I don't know if I can do anything about it if I did.
I think it's a top 10. I don't think it's number one.
No, it's a top 10 in people's minds, but the real issue is energy, because the climate policy that is being adopted
That's a
all
better
around the
word.
world.
I'm with you there. I'm more on the energy side, but we have to pay attention to this because
Yes.
if we don't pay attention to this could be an issue in the next 200 years.
But it's the energy side that I'm talking about being basically a suicide pact, the net zero thing. And the whole idea that we can end the use of fossil fuels without increasing nuclear energy. Because the same people who are against all fossil fuel use are also against all nuclear energy. And that is the only technology that can actually replace fossil fuels as a reliable source 24/7. Hydroelectric is just as good, except there's flat places and dry places where there can't be any hydroelectric energy. Whereas nuclear can be used anywhere from the North Pole to the equator, out on the oceans on a barge. You can put nuclear energy anywhere in the world. All you need to do is cool it with water or air, and you can have it there. So the Russians are floating barges down the rivers from the north in the Arctic to some of the cities that don't have a grid that are way up north, like they purposely developed up there, and they're bringing nuclear reactors in there. Russia, China, and India are all way ahead of the United States now in nuclear reactor technology. And Britain is even further ahead, too, in many ways. They've got Boeing there, not Boeing, sorry. I'm trying to think of the people who make
Raytheon.
really expensive cars. What is the most expensive British car?
Rolls-Royce.
Rolls-Royce, yes. Yeah. It's Rolls-Royce that has been building the submarine nuclear engines for UK fleet for 60 years or more. They know how to do it. And so the fact of the matter is, we could replace 50% of the fossil fuels in the next 30 years or 40 years with nuclear energy with no difficulty at all. But the idea that wind and solar are going to replace fossil fuels or nuclear or hydroelectric is absolutely insane. Can I just explain a little bit? When you have wind and solar, you have at most 1/3 of the time can you produce reliable energy. The sun goes down all night, it's no good early in the morning or the afternoon, and then the clouds come, right? So solar energy is more like 20% capacity. So 80% of the time it can't serve the grid, which is a demand for energy at certain times a day, a certain amount. The same with wind. The wind stops at night, the wind stops in the summer, the wind stops in the winter, the wind stops for 2 weeks at a time. The wind stops when the propellers freeze up, the wind stops when the wind blows too fast because they have to tether the blades. And so if you're going to use batteries instead of gas or coal or nuclear to back up the wind and solar, you have to build 3 times as much capacity in production. In other words, if you need 100 megawatts of coal energy, you need 300 megawatts capacity of wind and solar energy to charge the batteries. Because you can't charge the batteries when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. But at the same time as you're charging the batteries, you have to be supplying the grid with the full amount of energy that it needs. So there's no technical feasibility study on this. There's no economic feasibility study on this. Mark Mills of the Manhattan Institute in New York is the expert. He's written 3 or 4 recent papers on how much material it's going to take. In terms of cement, the wind industry uses more than 100 times as much cement per unit of power produced as gas does. 100 times more cement. So the amount of fossil fuels that are required to build the wind and solar infrastructure makes wind and solar a parasite on the larger economy. That is a fair metaphor, a parasite. In other words, it's sucking wealth out of the system in order to support this stupid idea that wind and solar are renewable. Yes, the sun is renewable and the wind is renewable, but the infrastructure is not. The stuff they build isn't made out of plants. It's made out of steel and concrete and cadmium and aluminum and glass and lithium and cobalt and all these things. And if you look at the amount of material that has to go into a wind turbine compared to a gas plant, it's phenomenal. It means they have to mine vast amounts of ore and truck all this stuff everywhere. Huge machinery to put these things up and build them. So I've said that all the wind and solar infrastructure, onshore and offshore, should have to be built with wind and solar energy. In other words, they should not be allowed to use fossil fuels or nuclear or hydroelectric power to build the wind and solar infrastructure and then see how fast it disappears. It would be wiped off the face of the earth, and goodly so, because it is a parasite. And all these people are getting rich, all the crony capitalists are getting rich off the subsidies. First there are subsidies, then there are tax breaks, then there are mandates by utilities that politically are forcing the people to take the wind and solar when it's available, even though it costs more than the other technologies. It's a total mess. And this is the part of climate change that is worth paying attention to. The science of climate change, I cover it in my book thoroughly, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. The main reason that we have all these scare stories today is because there are a lot of things that are either invisible, carbon dioxide, radiation, whatever is supposed to be bad in GMOs, which actually doesn't exist because it doesn't have a name or a chemical formula, so therefore it's fake. But CO2 and radiation aren't fake, they're just invisible. So no one can see what they're doing. Then you have the remote things. Why are polar bears and coral reefs the main icons here? Because no one can see what they're doing, right? So they say 93% of the Great Barrier Reef is nearly dead, is practically dead, is bleached, is in its final terminal stage. None of those mean dead, of course. They make it like practically dead. It means it's going to die, right? No, it doesn't. Things come back from being practically dead, like coral reefs. And they weren't practically dead in the first place. That was all hype anyways. Polar bear population has grown by 4 to 5 times in the last 50 years. I ask big audiences of professional people, how many of you have heard of the international treaty signed in 1973 by all the polar nations ending the unrestricted hunting of polar bears? No one's ever heard of it. No one ever talks about it. They don't want you to know about that because that treaty, on the advice of wildlife biologists to the leaders of those countries around the pole, that has caused a 3 to 5 times increase in polar bear populations. To this day, where now the people who live up in the polar bear region in Canada, it's Nunavut and then it's Greenland and Norway, those people in Nunavut, which is Canada, has the most polar bears of anybody because we have so many islands up there in the Arctic. Those people have passed a polar bear management plan 2 years ago because they think there's too many polar bears because they're eating people and they are breaking into houses and there's just too many of them. They've grown so much. And yet not one newspaper in Canada or the United States reported that polar bear management plan or report the treaty that was signed in 1973.